3 sentences. That's all it took for one stranger to decide exactly who I was. She looked at the dust on my boots, glanced at the worn leather folder in my hand, smiled like she'd already figured out my entire life, then said, "Sir, the loading dock is around back. That's where deliveries go." I remember standing there for a second, not because I was embarrassed, but because I had heard those words before, just in different buildings, different cities, spoken by different people who all made the same mistake. My name is Nathan Cole, and a year ago I walked into the grand opening of the Ashton Heights Tower wearing the same work boots I'd worn for nearly 18 years. They weren't dirty because I didn't own another pair. They were dirty because I'd spent the morning inspecting concrete work on another project 40 miles outside the city. I could have gone home, changed into one of those expensive Italian suits hanging in my closet, polished my shoes until they reflected the ceiling lights, maybe even arrived in the black sedan my assistant kept insisting I should use for public events. But that's never been me. I've always believed that if a pair of boots helped build the building, they deserved to walk through the front door after it was finished. Apparently, not everyone shared that opinion. The lobby looked exactly the way every luxury developer wanted it to look. White marble stretching across the floor like frozen water, giant glass walls catching the afternoon sun, crystal chandeliers hanging overhead, a string quartet playing near the staircase, waiters balancing trays of champagne while photographers floated around hunting for wealthy buyers. Everyone looked polished. Designer dresses, tailored suits, watches worth more than my first pickup truck, conversations about investment portfolios and vacation homes. Then there was me. Flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, faded jeans, old boots with dried concrete around the soles, carrying a weathered leather folder full of building sketches I'd been reviewing in the truck on my way over. Nobody noticed me at first, and honestly, I liked it that way. I wasn't there to make an entrance. I wanted to walk through the finished building one last time before officially handing it over, maybe speak to a few subcontractors, shake some hands, then quietly disappear before the speeches started. Instead, I wandered toward the sales display where scale models of the penthouses were sitting under glass. I wasn't looking at the model because I wanted to buy one. I was checking whether the lighting above it matched the original design I'd approved almost 3 years earlier. Funny the things you notice after spending thousands of hours watching a place come together. "Can I help you?" The voice was smooth, practiced, almost friendly, until I turned around. The woman wore a fitted white blazer with a gold name tag that read Victoria Sloan, Senior Luxury Property Consultant. She had the kind of smile that looked perfect from across the room, but somehow disappeared the closer you stood. "Yeah," I said. "I was wondering if you had a brochure for the penthouse floor plans." She looked at me, really looked at me, starting with my boots, then my jeans, then my shirt, finally landing on my face. Her smile faded just enough for me to notice. "The penthouses start at $4.1 million. I nodded. "That's good to know. I'd still like the brochure." She gave a tiny laugh. Not loud enough to make a scene, just loud enough to let me know I had become the joke. "Sir, today's event is reserved for qualified buyers." "I understand. Do you?" she asked, folding her arms. "Because usually people shopping in that price range don't show up dressed like they're here to repair the plumbing." A couple standing nearby chuckled under their breath. I could have corrected her right there. I could have ended the conversation with one sentence. Instead, I smiled. I've learned over the years that clothes don't pour concrete. That somehow annoyed her even more. "No," she replied, "but they usually tell me whether someone belongs in the room." She stepped sideways, accidentally kicking one of the rolled-up architectural blueprints resting near the display. It slid across the marble floor. My eyes followed it immediately. "You might want to pick that up," I said calmly. "Those drawings matter." She looked down, shrugged, then nudged the blueprint farther away with the pointed toe of her heel. "They're just copies." I looked at the paper for another second before answering. Nothing built this building started as just paper. For the first time, her expression hardened. It wasn't about the blueprint anymore. It was about the fact that I wasn't reacting the way she expected. She wanted embarrassment, maybe anger, maybe an apology before I walked away. Instead, I just kept standing there, calm enough to make her uncomfortable. "Sir," she said louder this time, making sure people nearby could hear, "I think it's best if you leave before you disturb our guests." A few heads turned, phones slowly lowered from conversations. Someone whispered something I couldn't quite hear. I glanced around the lobby. At the polished stone, the steel beams, hidden behind elegant walls, The enormous glass panels I'd watched crews install one winter morning during a snowstorm. For a second, I wasn't seeing the finished tower. I was seeing muddy boots, welding sparks, exhausted electricians eating lunch on upside-down buckets, crane operators working before sunrise, laborers laughing over burnt coffee while freezing in January winds. Those people belonged here every bit as much as the investors sipping champagne. "I'm not disturbing anyone," I answered quietly. "I'm just looking." Victoria sighed dramatically before waving toward one of the security guards. "Excuse me, would you mind escorting this gentleman out? We have a private event, and I'd rather not take chances." The guard hesitated. He looked at me, then at her, then started walking over. I didn't move. Not because I wanted confrontation, because I suddenly realized something that made me strangely sad. This building had been designed to bring people together. Somewhere along the way, people decided appearances mattered more than character, and standing there in the middle of the lobby, watching a security guard approach because of a pair of dusty boots, I had a feeling the evening was about to teach everyone in that room a lesson none of us would ever forget. The security guard wasn't aggressive. If anything, he looked uncomfortable, like he'd been handed a job he already knew wasn't going to end well. He stopped a few feet away and lowered his voice. "Sir, I'm sorry, but if you'd come with me," I smiled and nodded. "You're just doing your job." That seemed to surprise him more than anything else that had happened. Most people, when they were embarrassed in front of a crowd, either exploded or shrank. I did neither. I simply reached down, picked up the blueprint Victoria had kicked aside, carefully rolled it back together, brushed a little dust off the edge, and handed it to the nearest assistant. "These deserve better than the floor," I said. The young assistant looked almost embarrassed accepting it, quietly whispering, "Thank you." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Can we please move this along?" she muttered. By now, almost everyone in the lobby had stopped pretending not to watch. Wealthy buyers held champagne glasses halfway to their mouths. Photographers had subtly adjusted their lenses toward the unfolding scene. A pair of real estate agents whispered behind forced smiles. Public humiliation has a strange gravity. It pulls everyone's attention, even the people who claim they hate drama. As the guard lightly touched my elbow, the giant LED wall covering the far side of the lobby suddenly faded to black. Every light in the room dimmed, just enough to direct everyone's eyes toward the stage. The string quartet stopped playing. A voice over the speakers welcomed everyone to the official grand opening of Ashton Heights Tower, thanking investors, architects, engineers, city officials, and future residents for attending. Victoria folded her arms with a satisfied smile, probably assuming the ceremony would continue while I quietly disappeared through the front doors. Then the announcer spoke 4 words that changed the temperature of the entire room. "Please welcome our founder." A short promotional video began rolling across the massive screen. Images flashed one after another. Excavators breaking ground, workers tying rebar before sunrise, concrete trucks stretching down muddy roads, steel beams climbing into the sky, electricians running cable through unfinished hallways, roofers battling rainstorms, painters laughing with drywall crews during lunch breaks. None of the footage showed luxury. It showed work, sweat, cold mornings, dirt under fingernails. Then, almost without warning, a photograph appeared that made me laugh under my breath. It was me, younger, covered head to toe in mud after a foundation pour that had gone sideways because a thunderstorm flooded half the site. Someone had taken the picture years earlier when we were all too exhausted to care. I remembered that day perfectly. We'd lost an entire section of concrete because the weather forecast had been wrong. My superintendent wanted to shut the project down for the week. Instead, we stayed all night, every crew together, rebuilding forms under portable floodlights until sunrise. Nobody complained. Nobody asked whose job it was. They simply helped because that's what builders do. I heard someone behind me whisper, "Wait, that's him." Another voice answered, "No way." The guard beside me slowly removed his hand from my arm. Across the room, Victoria stared at the screen, then back at me, then back again. Her confidence cracked for the first time. The video ended. The lights brightened. From the side of the stage, a woman in a navy suit stepped toward the microphone. Her name was Caroline Mercer, the CEO of Cole Urban Development. We'd worked together for 12 years. Caroline didn't panic easily, but the second she looked across the lobby, she frowned. "Where's Nathan?" she asked into the microphone without realizing it was still live. Hundreds of people instinctively turned in different directions searching for whoever Nathan was supposed to be. Caroline spotted me standing near the entrance beside the security guard. Her expression changed instantly. Without another word, she stepped off the stage and walked straight through the crowd. Conversation stopped one by one as people moved aside to let her pass. Victoria stood frozen. I don't think she'd fully accepted what was happening yet. Caroline reached me, smiled warmly, and wrapped both hands around mine. "There you are," she said. "I've been looking everywhere. They're waiting on you." The silence inside that lobby became almost uncomfortable. Caroline looked at the security guard, then at Victoria, reading the situation in less than 2 seconds. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Nobody answered. Finally, the guard spoke first. "Ma'am, I was asked to escort him out." Caroline blinked once. "Escort him out?" The guard nodded carefully. Caroline turned toward Victoria. "Who asked for that?" Victoria swallowed. I didn't know who." Caroline interrupted before she could finish. "No, you didn't know who he was." She let those words hang in the air for a second before continuing, which shouldn't have mattered. Then Caroline faced the audience again and smiled with remarkable composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to correct something before tonight's program continues." She gently placed one hand on my shoulder. "This is Nathan Cole." A few people quietly applauded. Assuming I was some executive, Caroline continued. "Nathan didn't just invest in Ashton Heights Tower. He designed its development strategy, purchased the original land when everyone else thought it was worthless, personally approved every major construction phase, and owns this property through Cole Urban Development." Gasps rolled across the room almost like a wave. Someone actually dropped a champagne glass. One of the photographers lowered his camera, looked at the tiny screen on the back of it, then immediately raised it again, because he realized he'd just captured the beginning of a story every local news station would want. Victoria looked as though every ounce of color had drained from her face. "No," she whispered to herself. "No." I honestly felt sorry for her in that moment, not because she'd embarrassed herself, because I knew exactly what realization had just hit her. She wasn't remembering what she'd said. She was remembering that she'd said it in front of hundreds of witnesses. Caroline leaned toward me quietly. "Would you like me to handle this?" I shook my head. "No. Let me." I walked a few steps toward Victoria. She immediately started speaking before I even opened my mouth. "Mr. Cole, I'm so sorry. I honestly had no idea." If I'd known, I gently raised one hand. "That's exactly the problem." She stopped talking. "You keep saying you didn't know." My voice stayed calm enough that several people leaned in to hear better. "Tell me something. If I'd actually been a plumber, or a delivery driver, or a maintenance worker, would anything you said tonight have been acceptable?" She couldn't answer. Would those people deserve less respect, more silence? Would they deserve to be laughed at? Her eyes filled with tears, but not the dramatic kind. These were the tears that come when someone realizes they can't explain away what they've done. I looked around the room at everyone watching. This tower exists because thousands of people showed up wearing boots that looked exactly like these. I tapped one foot lightly against the marble floor. Concrete workers, welders, crane operators, pipe fitters, cleaners, inspectors, carpenters, electricians. Most of them will never own a penthouse here, but every single family who moves into this building will spend the next 50 years relying on work those men and women did with their hands. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I continued quietly. "You know what's funny?" A small smile crossed my face. "This morning, one of my iron workers apologized because he accidentally got concrete on my boots." A few people laughed softly, unsure if they were allowed to. I told him not to worry. Boots are supposed to look like they've been somewhere. Even Victoria looked down at my boots. I could almost see her replaying the last 15 minutes over and over in her head. Caroline stepped beside me. "Nathan, the board wants to know how you'd like to proceed." That was the question everyone was waiting for. Revenge would have been easy. Humiliation would have been satisfying for about 5 minutes. But buildings teach you something after enough years. When a foundation cracks, screaming at the concrete doesn't fix it. You repair what failed and make sure it never happens again. I looked directly at Victoria. "I'm not interested in embarrassing you." She looked up hopefully. "But actions have consequences." Her shoulders dropped before I even finished speaking. "Effective immediately," I said. "Your brokerage firm will no longer represent premium listings in this development." Audible murmurs spread through the crowd. Losing those listings meant losing millions in future commissions. "Not because you embarrassed me," I continued. "Because tonight you demonstrated that you cannot represent the values this company was built on." Victoria closed her eyes. She understood exactly what that meant. This wasn't just about one sale. It was about trust. And once trust disappears in this business, rebuilding it can take years. Caroline quietly nodded. I'll notify the board. As she walked away, I noticed something unexpected. The same young assistant who had accepted the blueprint earlier walked over carrying a fresh brochure. She held it out with both hands and smiled nervously. Mr. Cole, I believe you asked for one of these. I laughed, took the brochure, and slipped it into my old leather folder. Thank you, I said. I've been trying to get one all evening. I finally walked onto the stage carrying the same old leather folder and the same dusty boots that had apparently caused so much concern 15 minutes earlier. And for a moment I just stood there looking out across the room. The applause was polite at first, then slowly grew louder, but I wasn't listening to it. My eyes kept drifting toward the back of the ballroom where several members of the construction crews had quietly slipped in after finishing cleanup outside. Most of them were still wearing reflective jackets, work pants, and boots that looked just like mine. They hadn't come for the speeches. They came because when you spend almost 3 years building something together, watching the lights finally turn on feels personal. I cleared my throat and smiled. Everyone keeps congratulating me tonight, I said. But the truth is, I didn't build this tower. A few people looked confused. I pointed toward the back of the room. Those men and women did. Every head turned. The electricians looked at each other awkwardly. One of the crane operators actually shook his head as if hoping nobody would notice him. The drywall foreman laughed and tried hiding behind a concrete superintendent twice his size. I just signed papers, I continued. They showed up before sunrise. Worked through rainstorms, heat waves, frozen mornings, and more deadlines than I'd like to remember. If anyone deserves applause tonight, it's them. The room erupted again, this time much louder than before, and I watched something I'll probably never forget. The people who had spent the evening talking about investment portfolios and luxury finishes stood up to applaud the workers who had quietly built the place with their hands. Some of those workers looked embarrassed. Others smiled. A few simply nodded because they weren't the kind of people who needed attention to know they'd done honest work. After the ceremony ended, dozens of guests approached me. Some wanted pictures. Others wanted business cards or investment meetings. A few apologized for laughing earlier when Victoria made her comments. I accepted every apology because carrying anger is exhausting, and I'd spent too many years learning that bitterness usually hurts the person holding it more than anyone else. Before I left, I walked back across the lobby one last time. Victoria was still there, sitting alone near the sales desk after most of the crowd had gone home. Her makeup had started to smear. Her phone hadn't stopped vibrating for nearly an hour, and several people from her brokerage firm had already called asking what had happened. She looked up as I approached. Mr. Cole, she said quietly. Nathan is fine, I answered. She nodded. Nathan? I know saying I'm sorry doesn't change anything. No, I admitted. It doesn't. We stood there for a few seconds in complete silence. Then she surprised me. Can I ask you something? Of course. When did you realize who I thought you were? I smiled a little. About 3 seconds after you looked at my boots. She looked down and let out a painful laugh at herself. And you still stayed. Yeah, why? I thought about that before answering. Because sometimes people don't realize who they are until life lets them hear themselves out loud. She stared at the marble floor. I grew up with nothing, she whispered. My parents worked 2 jobs each. I promised myself I'd never go back to that life. And somewhere along the way I started believing expensive things made successful people. That's more common than you think, I said. Success has a funny way of convincing people to forget what struggle looks like. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Do you think I'll ever recover from this? I gave her the only honest answer I had. Professionally, maybe. Personally, that depends on whether tonight embarrasses you or changes you. I wished her well and walked outside into the cool evening air. My truck was still parked exactly where I'd left it that morning, covered in a thin layer of construction dust. As I climbed inside, I looked back one last time at Ashton Heights Tower glowing against the night sky. It was beautiful, not because of the glass or the marble or the expensive penthouses, but because I knew every beam, every wall, every hallway had a story behind it. Buildings aren't remembered because they're tall. They're remembered because of the people who build them and the values they quietly stand for long after everyone else goes home. A few months later, I approved a new company policy requiring every employee, every sales consultant, every property manager, and every executive to spend one full day each year working alongside construction crews, maintenance teams, janitors, landscapers, and security staff before representing any of our developments. Some executives complained at first. None of them complained afterward. Amazing what happens when you spend 8 hours carrying lumber, cleaning hallways, or pouring concrete beside someone you've never bothered to notice before. As for Victoria, I heard she eventually found another position in real estate after completing professional ethics training and volunteering with a nonprofit that renovated homes for veterans. I honestly hope she succeeds. Not because I forgot what happened, but because I believe people can become better after the worst day of their lives if they're willing to face it instead of running from it. Even now, whenever someone asks why I still wear old work boots to million-dollar meetings, I usually smile and tell them the same thing. These boots remind me that concrete doesn't care how expensive your watch is, steel doesn't respect designer suits, and character is still the strongest foundation anyone can build on. But here's the question I want to leave with you. If you had been standing in that lobby that afternoon, before anyone knew who I was, would you have spoken up? Or would you have stayed silent like everyone else? And after learning the truth, do you think Victoria deserved to lose her career? Or did the punishment go too far? I'd genuinely like to hear your opinion, because stories like this rarely have simple answers. If this story made you think, share your perspective in the comments below, because some of the best conversations happen when people disagree respectfully. And if you've ever been judged because of how you looked, what you wore, or the job you did, tell us your story too. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.